Hey everyone out there, thank you for joining me today. This is the Tim Laskus Show, episode 005. Today's featured guest is Steve Stewart. Steve is a personal finance architect. He offers courses and coaching. He has his own podcast called Money Plan SOS. He's also been featured on hit shows such as Dave Ramsey. So get prepared and enjoy.
The Tim Laskus Show, in search of entrepreneurial gold. Tim digs deep into the minds of his guests, entertaining, down to earth, and informative. Now, here's your host, Tim Laskus.
Welcome everyone to the Tim Laskus Show, and I'm very happy to have Steve Stewart as a guest today. Steve, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tim. It's a pleasure. Glad to be on.
Hey, yeah, I'm glad you took your time out of your busy day. And earlier you were telling me that you got a drone for Christmas.
Yeah, it blew me away. My wife and daughter bought me this. It's an X-Wing drone, and it comes with the Death Star that hovers around, and you can actually shoot, quote unquote, lasers at it to shoot it down out of the sky. It's really neat.
That's awesome. And how easy are those things to fly?
Oh, it took about 5 or 6 tries just to get it to where it was normally stable, but I think we've got it now.
So how many times have you crashed it?
Oh, well, it crashes all the time, but they're built that way. So AirHog makes some good stuff.
So hopefully you have a lot of spare parts. If you're like me, you used to have those little kind of toy drones when they first came out. First time it would go up, it would hit the fan or it hit the ceiling, and then the blend of the blades would come off, and I'm like, oh man, that's my luck. Well, what else do you do for fun? I like my guests to kind of share a little bit about themselves aside from business. And I know you're into drones and doing all that cool stuff, but is there anything else that you like to do and just when you get out of the house and let loose?
I'm kind of a simple guy. Actually, my favorite thing I had a job that kept me on the road from the time before I met my wife, and we've now been married since 2000. So it's going to be going on 17 years here in a little bit.
Congratulations.
But I had a job that kept me on the road a lot, flying, driving. And now that I'm working from home, and we'll get into that in a little bit, I just love staying here. Like right now, we're recording this in January. Mm-hmm. And the best thing in the world is to have dinner, to have a fire lit in the fireplace, and then just relax on the couches. My wife and daughter play these little games between them on their phones and just hanging out, talking, chatting. It's just my favorite thing to do to relax.
Well, the time that you miss when you're away from family is just time you can't get back. And so, any time that you're fortunate enough to have that opportunity to stay at home and stay with loved ones. And, I have a 3-year-old son, and man, I try to spend as much time as I can. And I'm just blessed. I don't have a job where I'm, traveling around all the time. And, I just hear, stories of parents who are, gone 3, 4, 5 days a week. And, then they have 2 days and then they're off again. And that's got to be tough. So I cannot imagine, but I understand, how important that is. So let's go into what you do professionally. Tell the listeners, what are you currently working on and what are you doing?
Well, this is the crazy thing because I never imagined making money doing this. In fact, I still can't imagine making money doing this, but I'm doing it now. And that is podcast engineering or podcast production, where I have a client who would record audio like you're doing. They send it to me and they give me all their elements. Elements are what I call the pieces of the show, like, sound effects, music, ads that they roll in the middle of it, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I create the show for them. And a lot of my clients actually let me upload the file to their hosting account. And it blew up in 2016, so much so that I had to leave what I thought was my passion career, which was financial wellness coaching, which I still love, but this new business has been hugely successful and I love doing it too.
So you've been open to this kind of new venture and just embraced it and ran with it. So it's kind of been a blessing, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I had been creating my own podcast. I launched the Money Plan SOS podcast in the year 2010, and I loved the medium. And I just stayed involved with that group of weird people who love to podcast. You know what I'm talking about,
sure,
too?
Absolutely.
And just got to be known within this group of financial bloggers. as, the blogger who also does a podcast. And, we've got a running joke in there. And if anybody is familiar with the FinCon
Mm,
group,
mhm.
they call me the Grayson Bell of podcasting.
Awesome.
Now, nobody gets that joke unless you're in that FinCon group. So, yeah. So it's just blown up and crazy. And I can't do anything else other than work on podcast editing just because it's become such a high demand. And I just can't believe that I'm actually making a living from it now.
Right. Well, what do you think has been kind of driving this movement for more and more people that are, getting into podcasting? And first, what is driving it? Two, what is the real benefit for people who maybe are just kind of toying around with the idea? Why should they jump in?
Well, it's the same as any business. It's when you get to be so busy with what you are doing or don't want to do something that you need to do, like bookkeeping. People say bookkeeping is the first thing they farm off to somebody else. When you see a value of farming off one of those pieces of the business that you just don't want to do or you don't have the time to do, then you see the value in it. And that's what's happened here is one of my biggest clients has a hugely successful show in our space.
Mm,
It's called Stacking Benjamins. And he had an editor out in the Philippines and it was very reasonable, but he still had to put the show together. And it's got like 16 different elements. And it would take him at least another hour and a half just to put the show together and run through it one last time. Well, he got to the point, he's like, you know what, Steve, I just need you to do it all. And he passed it off to me. And I mean, that show's 3 days a week and it's over an hour
wow.
long. So it's,
So,
it's a good chunk of work, but it's also, it's my favorite podcast. And it has been since they launched it. So somehow it all ties together. I don't know how that happened.
well, do you do the RSS feed and do you do the show notes and all that stuff too, or?
For some, most of the time I don't do show notes. Show notes is something that just is way too time consuming and that's not my skill set. I can create a short summary, but as far as RSS feed, and that's going to get geeky for your listeners, I'm sure. I can help them manage it, but I won't maintain it for them if you know what I mean. That's another, like I was saying, outsourcing some of those things you don't want to do. That's why I believe in media hosting. A company that I recommend because I used it myself is Libsyn, and they do a fantastic job. So they create your RSS feed. All you got to do is upload the file to them, tell it when and where you want it to go, and
Make it easy.
that it's like WordPress blog post. It's easy.
You talked about farming things out. It makes me think of Tim Ferriss and how he farms everything out. I don't know that he even dresses himself. I think he farms that out, but but that seems to be the thing that a lot of people are jumping on, and it does free up your time for things that you think are more important. And so it's a blessing that they have all these services that can take care of most of your needs personally and professionally, and it sounds like you have a great niche there, and there's a big demand. Where do you see podcasting going in the future? What's going to be new for podcasting?
I can't see podcasting ever becoming as mainstream as YouTube. I just can't. I still think podcasting is kind of like the CB radio of I don't know what to compare it to. It's like CB radio. I mean, there's people out there who get into it and they love it. I mean, that's their thing. But you talk to somebody else about CB radio and they're like, oh, that's the truckers say 10-4 on and all that stuff, but they are not into it at all. So yeah, definitely a podcast consumer, a podcast listener, and definitely a podcast host. We kind of get it. And since podcasting is so much more of an intimate medium than anything else out there, I think that's where people get consumed with it. And that's where I found the value in starting my own show, is that personal relationship with somebody that I have, even though I'm just talking to my computer.
Yeah. Well, you're in their ears. I mean, you're directly in their ears, and it's your voice, it's the story, it's everything that's about it that really forms that connection, with the listeners. And I think you're right. For people who have never listened to a podcast, they're like, podcast, what is that? But then once they jump into iTunes or something, and which is already preloaded onto your iPhone, and you go, wow, that's a pretty cool show. I can listen to shows about anything, cement trucks if I wanted to. I'm sure there's a podcast out there on that. I did hear that some of the car manufacturers are going to install in the dashboard an iTunes application. Did you hear anything about that?
Honestly, I don't know how that got to be such a popular topic of discussion, because I can already stream podcasts in my car. All I got to do is hook up my Bluetooth phone,
Right.
to the stereo, and there you go.
Yeah.
In fact, I had I have a story I could tell later if you want, but
Sure.
no, I want to get into it. It's just too long. But anyway, 2 years ago, I purchased a car that is older than my 16-year-old daughter.
Okay.
Paid cash for it,
Hmm.
and it didn't have anything compatible
Right.
with taking audio and plugging it into the stereo. It was just a radio, and it had a 6-disc changer in the trunk. I don't have CDs that I use anymore, so.
Uh-huh.
But I just bought this thing on Amazon. It was $7, and it connects you plug it in the cigarette lighter, and
Uh-huh.
it's a Bluetooth receiver that broadcasts, the connection from your phone to your stereo. Boom,
Cool.
done. $7, and even my car, that's again older than my 16-year-old daughter, can play podcasts in it now.
That's awesome. So the technology out there is, you don't need to have it built in. There's all these other
No.
companies that make it easy to have it and add it. So that is cool. Since you've been down this road and you've been an entrepreneur, and what are some tips for people who are kind of thinking about being an entrepreneur, or maybe who are already in business? Something that you've stumbled across that's been helpful for you, or maybe even some advice for someone who's, kind of toying around with the idea of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, entrepreneurship is really, it's not for everybody. I mean, I would love to say that it is for everybody, because I really like the fact that you can create your own job, and you can, structure your life around it. Of course, there's exterior forces that are commanding you to be successful in it, like,
Hmm.
gasoline for the car, food for your kids, and, paying the mortgage and stuff like that.
Right.
But, so it's not for everybody though. But when it is something that you're interested in doing, I mean, what does that look like? That was the thing that blew my mind when this current business took over, because I really, truly thought that God was directing me down this path of financial coaching and spreading the word of financial wellness. And, my wife and I, we did the steps. We got out of debt in 2007, consumer debt, and we actually ended up paying off the house in 2015. We have absolutely zero debt, which makes it really easy to become an entrepreneur, because now a lot of
Hmm.
those external forces, the gasoline for the car and the food, those are fairly easy.
Right.
The mortgage was, $1,100. That's not even including the taxes and insurance. So take that out of your monthly budget, and you got a little more leeway on what you can do. So if I were to give someone a tip, if they were thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, I mean, start small. Just start small. Find something that you love to do, and start to, see if other people are interested in that. You've got to find the market, and that's the big problem with entrepreneurship, is you got to find a market. I was able to find a market in podcast production that I could not
Hmm.
find in, 1,500 to 2,000 people who are listening to my podcast. I just couldn't find it there. But now I've got this very small niche of very dedicated
Hmm.
people who see the value in farming off this piece of work that they just hated to spend the time doing. And that's where this thing has just exploded. So one thing I would say for sure everybody should be doing, whether it's your personal life or in entrepreneurship, especially if you're running a business, is to simply track your expenses. Track your expenses. Because if you're not doing that, you don't know where the money's going. You don't know what can be trimmed. You don't see the opportunities where you should be spending more money. If you do an ad and it works really well, but you're not tracking anything, I mean, how did you know it worked well?
Right.
Can you throw more money at it to become even more successful, to get more leads, to get more clients? Track your expenses, which
Mhm.
will force you into paying attention to your money. And that's what I think is very important to everybody, is you've got to pay attention to your money.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are lacking that skill in their personal lives, and then professionally, it's a whole nother level, and they get into trouble real quick. And a lot of businesses go out of business because they don't have the resources. Maybe the best idea, but they run out of money, or they spend their money unwisely. They put it into things that aren't working, and they didn't track it early enough to know that it wasn't working, to be able to try something else. And I think that's, you kind of hit it right on when you talked about
Yeah. And that was kind of the problem with my business, is I wasn't really seeing how much time I was spending on all of my outreach programs. The podcast was one of them that, I could see where I was spending a lot of time now that just didn't have a huge payback. So I
Mhm.
would, as a lot of my focus on my podcast was to try and find clients through it. through Money Plan SOS. And
Mhm.
that just wasn't panning out, where I might have been able to at least create a nice small revenue stream every single month from having a book, having a course. And I didn't jump on those soon enough. And it's because I
Mhm.
wasn't really paying attention to what was successful. Now, I was tracking the money, but you also need to kind of
Mhm.
correlate that with, okay, where am I getting my biggest bang for the buck? And I think that's where
Mhm.
an entrepreneur really needs to spend, a little bit of time every single week just looking at the numbers.
That's great advice. So for everyone out there, be able to track your money and track what's working in your business. And if it ain't working, then find a new, as far as advertising or anything else that's helping with your business, dump a ton of money into something that's not working, give it some time and then be able to shift gears. So I think that's great. Now, Steve, would you advise someone to start off as a sidepreneur before giving up that job? I mean, there's people out there on kind of both sides of the coin who say, some are like, no, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, then you just need to burn the ships and do it. And that's the way you'll be successful. And then other people are like, no, you need to step into it gradually, figure out this is really you and do it, small steps. Do you have any advice on that?
No, you got to start out small as a
Hmm.
sidepreneur. You have to. I mean, for those
Hmm.
people who do have those huge success stories saying, oh, I quit my job and made $1 million, blah, blah, blah. Okay, those are the outliers. Those are the small stories that are sensational and they're fantastic. But when you look at the number of people who have actually tried to start a business and how many have failed, you know, one out of a thousand, maybe. I don't think
Hmm.
it's that much. Actually, made it that way. What I do hear is a lot of people like I just finished producing the show for PT Money, and
Hmm.
he's got a show called Masters of Money, and he interviewed a girl named Zena Kumak, and Zena started freelancing on the side. And from that, she was able to, make some extra money, which she threw at all her debt, got out of debt, built herself up a financial security piece, which was, a nice savings account for emergencies. And they were able to, pay off all the debt. Then she was able to spend more time focused on that to where it blossomed into what she's doing now. Pretty much is all freelancing. And that's where that success story is more realistic. And you've got a better chance of actually succeeding and not crashing and burning.
Wow, great story and great advice. Now, when did you realize that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? And, what kind of helped you to take that step in that direction?
I don't know if I ever realized. I remember being on an interview once and they said, "You're an entrepreneur." I'm like, "No, I'm not." And they're like, "Yeah, you are." I'm like, "No, no, I'm not." And I still don't know if I really am. I guess I could, I got a small business and I just approach everything with a servant's heart, whether that's my business or personal relationships or anything. If
Hmm.
if you need some help, I'm going to jump in to help you. And if you find value in that, that's where the piece of the money can come into play.
Hmm.
So did I ever figure out when it was? Obviously working like this job affords me the opportunity, almost requires me to work from home, which by the way, I love to do. Some
Hmm.
people like to go in the office and clock in and out and then leave the work at the workplace. And I get that. I
Hmm.
totally get that. But I just love being able to just, so I think that's what I'm trying to say is that's the draw that took me towards starting this business and saying, hey, you know what? I love doing this. I think this is something that can make some money. Let's put a little more effort behind it. And so, yeah, I guess I could be titled now Steve Stewart Entrepreneur, which still cracks me up.
Well, it sounds like you started off on the right foot when you stated, how can I serve and provide value? And
Hmm.
those are key in starting out. Because if you use that as your ideology going forward is how can I serve whoever my customers are, regardless of what kind of service or
Hmm.
product that you have out there, how can I serve and how can I provide value is the right step going forward. And that's what'll help you to get through those rough moments because it's not all fun. And a lot of times, especially on Instagram, people love to share photos of stacks of cash and yachts and Lamborghinis and they think, man, being an entrepreneur, it's just gonna be great. I'm gonna make money. It's all about me, me, me. And that's what gets likes on Instagram. But in reality, that isn't how it really works. And that's not what's going to sustain you. Because if money and success just for you only, that will never sustain you. You'll get into trouble pretty quick. And so I think people have a real difficult time with that. It's like, well, how can I go out there and just make tons of cash? And but they don't have that really solid foundation of how can I serve my customers and provide value. So I think that was great that you brought that up. So when you were growing up, although you never maybe thought you were going to be an entrepreneur, in your family, what were some of the messages that you received about money and finances? Because it sounds like later on, you were able to figure out pretty quick that, debt's not the way to go. But, you know, did you get that message early in your life, or did you get something else? Or maybe you didn't get a message at all?
I would have to say my upbringing was from just having frugal parents. And when I say
Hmm.
frugal, I don't mean cheap. Cheap and frugal have different definitions. Frugal is somebody who is looking to get, we'll use that phrase, the biggest bang for the buck. You can buy something cheap. You go to the dollar store, buy anything, that's cheap. But if you buy something of value,
Hmm.
but you get a good price for it, that's frugality. And my mom, she was born on a farm. My dad comes from humble beginnings. I kind of grew up with that in a suburb of Toledo, Ohio. Small little
Hmm.
town. You knew your neighbors. I kind of miss that these days. We're so hustle and bustle with everything that's going on, and these instant communication
Hmm.
devices that we have in our hands called
Yeah.
iPhones. Anybody can reach us at any time. That's completely different than what we grew up with. So I guess I just kind of grew up in that environment, which I would say that I'm blessed to have done. However, I can see it in my clients as well, comparing their life with mine. I think a lot of people have a lot more fun than I do because they aren't so frugal. Sometimes you got to take those chances and those risks and do something crazy and bold. And I try to put myself in those situations, but I do a little bit of risk assessment there too, saying, okay, if this all goes wrong, what's the worst case scenario? And if it's not so bad, go for it. What's the worst that can happen? You're not going to
Hmm.
die, you
Hmm.
know. So yeah, it's humble beginnings. I never really learned how money worked. I think I just kind of observed it from my parents, who didn't have a strong opinion on it one way or the other.
Hmm.
It's just, buy what you need, enjoy the luxuries of life. If you go out to eat. I mean, nowadays people think it's almost like a requirement. You go out to eat once a week. No, that's a luxury.
Hmm.
And when
True.
you find contentment in those things, I think you're going to enjoy life much, much better.
Hmm. Absolutely. And that's a great story of growing up and in your household. And yeah, things have really changed. And it's and you mentioned iPhones, and they're a blessing and a curse with technology today. And I don't know if you remember when the first cell phones came out, the one that had the battery, and you had to wear it over your shoulder, and that had like a
Oh yeah.
cord. And I think those were, I don't know when those came out, early 80s or something. That was around the Miami Vice days when I was
It was the
watching that
late
on TV.
80s because I had somebody buy one for me, and I was like, I'm not going to get any use out of this, but thank you. And I was like, what prompted this guy to buy one for me? I felt bad not using it, but I guess that's kind of the thing. As I was sitting there evaluating the item to say, does this fit in my life? And
Hmm.
did a little bit of that risk assessment to say, okay, worst case scenario is if I, buy a cell phone plan. But I was like, I'm not going to use this that
Hmm.
much. I don't need to be talking in my car. And this is way before people were talking about, hands-free driving.
Hmm.
So I just didn't get any use out of it, which I felt really bad for the guy. But, what are you going to do? It
Right.
didn't fit my life.
Exactly. Exactly. And and as technology comes out, it adds to the keeping up with the Joneses, more so than, just the house and the cars, but then it's the gadgets, the iPads, the iPhones, and it really can complicate your life pretty quickly. And my wife has family that lives in Nicaragua, and they live high in the mountains, several hours away from the nearest town by horseback. They're totally unplugged. They don't have electricity, they don't have television, they don't have
Wow.
refrigeration, but her uncle has a very large dairy farm. And so they have the cows for milk. They milk the cows, they take that milk and make cheese, and then they load it up on the horses and take it down to town. And they also farm. And so they sell whatever they grow as well. That's how they make money. And they are the happiest family I've ever met, and they're totally just unplugged. And it's not about those gadgets, and they're not into that. And it's just about food, family, and religion. And man, there's just something that's wholesome about that. And we have the best time. I mean, they still have outhouses up there, so there's no indoor plumbing, and it's like going back in time. And I love it. I love it. Technology can be great, but we don't have to have it. And there are people out there today who don't, have it, and they do just fine. So I think it's great for people to travel, especially to third world countries, and see how the other half lives. So it
Yes.
will definitely change your perspective. But for you in being able to start your own business and having ups and downs, and what's the mental strain that comes along with that when you're in charge of your own company and business, and having to make money and be a provider that way for your family instead of having a job. What's the mental side of that? How difficult is it?
I've been finding that it's not too difficult at all. I just have to make sure that I deliver what I promise. That's the hardest part, is making sure I deliver,
Hmm.
quality product, if you want to be a generic term. Just be able to deliver that consistently with good quality.
And I think that's key, because a lot of people, they're really focused in on the fear of, I don't know if I can do this consistently. What if I let people down? What if, I let my family down? If I let the customers down? And there are some people who are just not cut out to be entrepreneurs and to run a company for themselves. And they really struggle with stress in general. And it can be easily very, very stressful for someone who jumps in as an entrepreneur. And many times you're having to wear a lot of different hats. You're sales, you're marketing, you're advertising, you're the creator of everything, the managing money, and you name it. And so that can easily be overwhelming for people. But, being able to stay focused on, how you can really provide a quality product or service is key. And again, to, stay on purpose and being able to serve and have value in what you bring. So, it's good to hear that you haven't had many struggles with that, when it comes to the mental side. Because I think that's something that's not really talked about a lot, how difficult it can be. And there's also a big population out there that, suicide rates can be very high for entrepreneurs. And it's not something that's really talked about. People, can get into debt real quick and get overwhelmed, and it can be very, very difficult. So, it's good to hear that you've been able to kind of, do this without many issues. And so with that being said, what's been kind of the most fulfilling, moment during your professional journey?
The most fulfilling moment in my professional journey.
Is there anything that stood out that you went, wow, this is awesome. This is, why I'm doing this, or you know, anything that kind of stands out that really just kind of cemented the fact that I'm in the right place. I'm doing what
Well,
I'm supposed to be doing.
honestly, I think it's the 15th of the month, because that's when I invoice my clients, and then they start paying, and I'm just like, wow, this is crazy. How in the world does somebody pay me to do editing of their show? For a pod,
Hmm.
I started as doing the show by myself, all by my, it was all me. And
Yep.
I know what it takes to record a show, edit the show, produce the show, upload it, tag it, blog post, everything. And for somebody to pay me to do that, and I'll just give some numbers. In November, I invoiced $4,000 worth of work. And if you think about
Hmm.
the overhead that it
So,
takes to edit audio, there really isn't any. I need to have my
hmm.
internet connection pretty solid. That's about it. So, wow, that's taxes, of course, is the bane of my existence, and it should be for every entrepreneur. But
Oh
it's the
yeah.
price we pay to live in the United States and be free and have the services that
Hmm.
we do. So I forget what your question was, but yeah, it's
Yeah, well, I mean, that's got to be very fulfilling, to be able to
no, that's it.
see
Yeah.
that, okay, the fruits of my labor, here it is, like, people are paying me. And it's obvious to tell that you're not really stressed out what you're doing. You love what you're doing, and you're good at what you do, and you're on message. You're on, let me provide value, let me serve others. And when you're like that, things kind of flow smoothly, and you're fulfilled, I'm sure, every moment. Anytime someone says, thanks, Steve, you did a great job on that show, I really appreciate it. And, it's the small things, and, the big things as well for a lot of people, and just having that satisfaction. But definitely when you see, numbers in the bank, that always makes a lot of people feel good. And sometimes people are like, wow, I love it so much. Man, I would almost do this for free, and I'm getting paid for it. And that makes it even better, and
Yes.
people savor it more. So, well, Steve, it's been great having you on the show. And now I'm going to kind of give you your time to kind of highlight your website and how people can find you, and if they want to utilize, your services and putting together their podcast, how can they find you?
Well, everything I do can be found at stevestewart.me. And that's not .com, because the guy who owns stevestewart.com has owned it for 20 years. 20 years.
20 years?
Yeah, 1997, he registered the domain, and I doubt I'll give it at any
You
time
jumped on
soon.
it fast.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. I mean, that was when I had my very first computer. That's long, long time ago. So
you don't think if you sent him a check for $100, he'd give it to you?
No, I don't think so. And what's sad is if you did go to stevestewart.com, you'd see it's just the static page with his information. That's it. It's not even, no pictures.
So he's not even really doing anything with it?
No, he just planted his flag, and there it is.
Have you tried to contact him?
I don't really know how to. I guess I could call the number on the thing, but yeah.
On the, there's a directory for people who, I don't know how to do it.
Well, his contact information's there. I just haven't spent the time to do it, because I figured that's something he's going to hold on to until he passes away. I think I have to monitor the obituaries first.
So people can find you on, it's stevestewart.me.
Me. Yep. That's where you find me, stevestewart.me.
And so again, to tell the listeners, so what can you do for them? What is your kind of main focus for your business on podcasting?
Taking the time and giving it back to them. They record the show. Most of my clients, they love to interview people, talk to them, find new things to discuss, share it with their audience, but they hate the, like bookkeeping. Entrepreneurs don't like bookkeeping, so they get a bookkeeper. There's money nerds out there who love bookkeeping, but they wouldn't be, caught dead interviewing people on a podcast. So I kind of take that piece of the work of taking the recording, producing it, making it sound good, and turning it to a full featured show, not just an intro and outro at the end, but, transitions in the middle, sound effects, things like that, if that's what the show requires. And I'm able to give the entrepreneur, the podcaster, their time back by doing that for them.
That's awesome. Priceless. Well, thank you, Steve. And remember, stevestewart.me, you can find him. Thanks, Steve. You've been great. I appreciate your time, and I'll definitely be in touch. Talk to you soon.
Want more entrepreneurial tips? Go to timlaskus.com.